in the hope that somebody will come along and say, there's money in this, let's support Meghan and her As Ever brand. I thought she behaved so badly, and Harry too.
Meghan Markle is facing a royal storm after clips of Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, exploded across social media, reigniting questions the palace never answered. What began as resurfaced interviews has turned into a viral debate about loyalty, truth, and whether Sophie was quietly exposing Meghan all along. Now millions online are dissecting every word, glance, and silence more intensely than ever before. But as backlash grows and opinion shifts again, what terrified Meghan this time? So what do you think? Was Sophie warning Meghan from the beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. When silence suddenly turned dangerous. The royal story that once seemed to be fading quietly into the background exploded back into public view almost overnight. Old interviews featuring Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, began spreading rapidly across social media platforms, pulling millions of viewers back into one of the monarchy's most controversial modern conflicts. Clips that had once passed with little attention were now being replayed repeatedly, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame, and discussed as though they contained hidden messages people had somehow missed the first time. At the center of the storm was one particular phrase Sophie had delivered calmly during an interview years earlier. "We tried to help." 4 simple words suddenly became the focus of endless debate. The timing could hardly have been worse for Meghan Markle. Interest in royal tensions had already started rising again after several commentators revisited older disputes involving Prince Harry's departure from royal duties. But the resurfacing of Sophie's remarks appeared to shift the conversation in an entirely different direction. Instead of focusing on Meghan's criticisms of palace life, online discussions increasingly centered on whether members of the royal family had actually attempted to support her behind the scenes. Commentary channels dissected Sophie's interviews with unusual intensity, examining every pause, every expression, and every carefully chosen sentence. Some believed Sophie had been subtly exposing contradictions for years without openly attacking Meghan at all. What made the situation more striking was Sophie's composure. Unlike the emotional television interviews that had dominated headlines in the past, Sophie never appeared visibly angry or defensive. Her tone remained measured, restrained, and controlled, even while discussing deeply sensitive events connected to the royal family. That contrast quickly became part of the online conversation. Viral compilations placed Sophie's calm statements beside Meghan's emotional public appearances, encouraging viewers to compare both women directly. Supporters of Meghan argued the clips were unfairly edited to create a misleading narrative. Critics, however, claimed the comparisons raised uncomfortable questions that could no longer be ignored. The controversy intensified further when older footage from Commonwealth Day 2020 also began circulating again. Social media users focused heavily on brief moments between Sophie and Meghan inside Westminster Abbey, especially a silent exchange that many viewers interpreted as cold and deliberate. Body language experts, royal commentators, and online creators all offered competing interpretations, turning a few seconds of footage into another viral battleground. Some insisted the clips revealed long-standing tension hidden beneath royal protocol, while others warned people were reading far too much into ordinary interactions. As the debate widened, Sophie's public image began taking on an almost symbolic role in the discussion. For some viewers, she represented patience, discipline, and quiet resilience within the institution. For others, she had become an unexpected voice that seemed to validate long-running concerns about how internal support within the monarchy was actually handled. The ambiguity of her words allowed both sides to project entirely different meanings onto the same short interview, and that ambiguity only fueled the spread of the controversy. Still, the growing attention surrounding Sophie's remarks created a serious problem for Meghan's public image. Every resurfaced clip seemed to reopen debates many believed had already ended years earlier. Search trends shifted dramatically, with old interviews, archived documentaries, and forgotten press segments suddenly returning to circulation as audiences attempted to piece together a timeline that now felt uncertain and fragmented. Even neutral observers found themselves pulled into the discussion as algorithm-driven feeds continued pushing contrasting interpretations side by side. What made the situation even more volatile was the absence of any official response. Neither palace communications nor representatives directly addressed the renewed wave of speculation, allowing silence to become its own kind of statement. In that silence, theories multiplied. Some suggested the calm refusal to engage was deliberate, meant to avoid amplifying the controversy further. Others believed it signaled something more uncomfortable, a desire to let public perception settle on its own without correction. Meanwhile, commentators began revisiting Meghan's earlier interviews with renewed scrutiny, comparing them against Sophie's remarks in ways that framed both narratives as part of a larger, unresolved story. Each new analysis added another layer, and each layer pulled more attention back into the same question. As millions continued revisiting the story from entirely new perspectives, one unsettling question quietly began hanging over everything. Had the public misunderstood the conflict all along? And as the online frenzy kept expanding across television, podcasts, and social media feeds, the palace remained silent while suspicion continued growing everywhere by then. Questions suddenly began multiplying across social media. Why were Sophie's forgotten words resurfacing now? What exactly terrified Meghan's supporters behind palace silence? And as royal insiders reportedly started reacting privately, had this viral storm exposed something far bigger than anyone expected before everything changed completely? Keep watching. 4 words shattered Meghan's narrative. By the time Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, quietly said, "We all tried to help," the public conversation surrounding Meghan Markle had already become deeply divided. Supporters of Meghan believed she had been abandoned inside the royal institution and forced to survive overwhelming pressure without meaningful support. Critics, however, increasingly questioned whether the full story had ever been publicly revealed. Then, Sophie's comment suddenly resurfaced online, and everything changed again. What first sounded like a polite and carefully measured statement quickly became one of the most discussed royal remarks on social media, television panels, and commentary channels across both Britain and the United States. The reaction was immediate because the sentence itself sounded simple, yet many viewers believed there was far more hidden beneath it. Sophie never raised her voice, never accused Meghan directly, and never challenged her publicly in dramatic fashion. Instead, she delivered the remark calmly, almost casually, during an interview while discussing the difficulties new members of the royal family often face. But analysts and royal commentators quickly focused on the wording itself. "We all tried to help" did not sound emotional or defensive. To many observers, it sounded precise, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. As clips of the interview spread online, attention rapidly shifted back toward Meghan's earlier claims during the Oprah Winfrey interview with Prince Harry. In that interview, Meghan described feeling isolated and unsupported while adjusting to royal life. Those comments had once generated enormous sympathy worldwide and intensified criticism toward Buckingham Palace. But Sophie's resurfaced statement forced many people to reconsider whether support may actually have existed behind closed doors. Suddenly, old reports about Sophie personally reaching out to Meghan began circulating again, along with claims that guidance and mentorship had repeatedly been offered during Meghan's earliest years inside the monarchy. The debate became increasingly intense because Sophie never appeared interested in publicly humiliating Meghan. That restraint became the center of the story itself. Royal commentators argued that Sophie understood something powerful about public perception. By refusing to launch direct attacks, she avoided appearing bitter or vindictive. Instead, she allowed a single sentence to create doubt naturally inside the minds of viewers. the silence surrounding her words seemed to carry even more weight than the statement itself. People began wondering whether Sophie's calm delivery made her version of events appear more believable than emotional public confrontations ever could. At the same time, Meghan's supporters strongly rejected the growing narrative online. Many insisted Sophie's remark was being unfairly exaggerated by critics already hostile toward Meghan and Harry. Others warned that social media users were deliberately turning subtle comments into evidence of larger conspiracies inside the royal family. Yet despite those objections, the conversation refused to disappear. The more people replayed Sophie's interview, the more attention shifted toward what she implied without fully saying aloud. And in that growing uncertainty, one carefully controlled sentence started reshaping the entire royal argument once again. Quiet voices became impossible for audiences everywhere to ignore. Why did Sophie choose those exact words so carefully? What frightened royal insiders enough to stay completely silent afterward? And why are viewers suddenly questioning everything they once believed about Meghan's original story? What surfaced next reportedly pushed palace tensions far beyond private discomfort into something far more dangerous. Silent glances reopened royal wounds. The moment the old Commonwealth Day footage returned online, the atmosphere surrounding Meghan Markle shifted again almost immediately. What had once seemed like a brief and uncomfortable royal appearance inside Westminster Abbey suddenly became the center of intense public scrutiny years later. Millions of viewers began replaying the same clips repeatedly, slowing them down, zooming in, and examining every movement between Meghan and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. The footage itself lasted only seconds, yet the reaction surrounding it grew enormous. For many people watching, those silent interactions now appeared far more revealing than they did when they first aired in 2020. Attention quickly focused on one particular moment. Sophie briefly turned toward Meghan and held a steady expression that online audiences immediately began describing as cold, restrained, and deliberate. Meghan appeared to glance away moments later, and social media users treated the exchange like a hidden clue buried inside a much larger royal conflict. Commentary channels filled with detailed breakdowns of body language, posture, eye contact, and facial expressions. Some viewers believed the tension between both women had finally become impossible to hide, while others argued the public was projecting drama onto ordinary royal behavior. Still, the debate continued spreading across television discussions, podcasts, and online platforms without slowing down. The renewed attention also brought older reports back into public conversation. Stories about Sophie allegedly attempting to mentor Meghan during her earliest months inside the royal family resurfaced once again. Commentators revisited claims that Sophie had personally offered advice, guidance, and emotional support, while Meghan adjusted to royal life after marrying Prince Harry. Reports suggesting those efforts were ignored or rejected suddenly gained fresh attention because people now connected them directly to the resurfaced footage from Commonwealth Day. To critics, the uncomfortable exchange inside Westminster Abbey no longer looked isolated. Instead, it appeared connected to years of unresolved tension quietly building behind palace walls. As the clips continued circulating online, a larger shift began taking shape. Viewers who once strongly defended Meghan started questioning whether certain warning signs had always existed in public view, but were overlooked at the time. Others pushed back fiercely against that interpretation, arguing Meghan had already faced relentless criticism for years and was now being unfairly targeted again through selective editing and speculation. But even among divided audiences, one thing became increasingly difficult to ignore. The public was no longer watching these royal moments the same way it once had. Every resurfaced clip now carried additional meaning because people were examining the past with completely different assumptions. For Meghan, the growing narrative presented a serious challenge. The more old footage resurfaced, the harder it became to control how those moments were interpreted publicly. Meanwhile, Sophie's silence only seemed to strengthen the mystery surrounding everything viewers believed they were seeing. And as more people revisited the past, searching for hidden signs, the royal story appeared to be entering an even more dangerous phase. Lingering doubts became impossible for audiences to ignore. Then another question quietly began spreading across social media. Were those royal tensions visible long before anyone admitted it? Did Sophie notice something others ignored? And why are insiders suddenly refusing to dismiss those resurfaced moments, just as entirely new claims begin emerging behind palace doors? Stay with us. Silence. Slowly rewrote royal perceptions. As the online debate surrounding Meghan Markle intensified, another reality slowly began reshaping public opinion behind the scenes. The royal family never launched a direct public campaign against Meghan or Prince Harry after they departed from royal duties. There were no emotional interviews from senior royals, no explosive televised responses, and no dramatic attempts to publicly challenge the accusations made during the Oprah Winfrey interview. Instead, Buckingham Palace largely remained silent. At first, many critics viewed that silence as weakness or avoidance, but over time, that strategy appeared to produce a very different effect, especially as Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, continued gaining attention for her calm and disciplined approach. While Meghan and Harry repeatedly appeared in documentaries, interviews, podcasts, and public discussions describing their experiences inside the monarchy, Sophie followed a completely different path. She rarely addressed the controversy directly and continued carrying out royal duties without visible frustration or public complaints. That contrast gradually became impossible for audiences to ignore. Royal commentators increasingly described Sophie as one of the monarchy's most dependable and discreet figures, someone trusted precisely because she avoided public confrontation even during periods of intense criticism surrounding the institution. The growing attention surrounding Sophie's resurfaced comments only strengthened that image further. Her words sounded restrained, measured, and carefully controlled at a time when public arguments about the royal family had become increasingly emotional and divided. According to several royal insiders, Sophie earned quiet respect inside palace circles because she never attempted to escalate tensions publicly. Instead, she maintained composure while allowing events to unfold naturally. For many observers, that restraint began carrying more credibility than louder public statements made elsewhere. At the same time, Meghan's continued media appearances created a difficult comparison that critics repeatedly emphasized online. Every new interview, podcast appearance, or public discussion reopened debate about the royal fallout, keeping old accusations alive in public conversation. Supporters argued Meghan had every right to tell her story openly after what she described as painful experiences inside the monarchy. Critics, however, claimed the constant public exposure weakened sympathy over time and made the palace's silence appear increasingly strategic rather than defensive. The deeper the debate grew, the more the conflict seemed to evolve beyond a disagreement between two women. It slowly became a larger battle between two completely different approaches to public image and power. Meghan relied on visibility, openness, and public storytelling. The monarchy relied on silence, patience, and controlled distance. Sophie unexpectedly became the clearest symbol of that institutional approach. And as public trust continued shifting in subtle but noticeable ways, many people started wondering whether silence itself had quietly become the royal family's most effective response all along. Yet the longer the palace refused to engage, the more curiosity continued building around everything left unsaid. Sophie's demeanor no longer looked passive to viewers. Instead, it appeared controlled, deliberate, and quietly powerful. In the middle of a media storm, the absence of conflict somehow started speaking louder than words. Why did palace insiders suddenly begin rallying behind Sophie after years of silence? What private conversations changed everything behind closed doors? And as Meghan continued speaking publicly, did the monarchy quietly realize restraint had become its most powerful weapon, Against a growing storm no one could completely control? Let's find out. Quiet loyalty ignites fierce backlash. What began as a resurfaced royal interview quickly transformed into a full-scale battle across the internet. Social media platforms became flooded with edited clips, reaction videos, and side-by-side comparisons involving Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, and Meghan Markle. Millions of viewers suddenly found themselves pulled into a conflict that no longer felt limited to old royal disagreements. Instead, it became a public fight over credibility, loyalty, and who people believed had been telling the truth all along. The more Sophie's comments spread online, the more divided audiences became. One viral trend in particular intensified the controversy dramatically. Edited compilations began portraying Sophie as someone who had quietly outmaneuvered Meghan without ever openly attacking her. Videos highlighted Sophie's calm interviews, composed expressions, and carefully chosen words, while contrasting them with Meghan's emotional public appearances and highly publicized interviews alongside Prince Harry. Comment sections quickly turned hostile as supporters from both sides flooded social media with competing interpretations. Some praised Sophie's restraint as dignified and intelligent. Others accused critics of unfairly rewriting history to damage Meghan's reputation years after the original controversy unfolded. Royal commentators added even more fuel to the debate. Several analysts argued that Sophie's public image carried unusual weight because of her long history inside the monarchy. For decades, she had built a reputation as disciplined, dependable, and deeply loyal to the institution. She rarely sought headlines for herself and avoided public drama even during difficult periods involving the royal family. Supporters of Sophie believed that history strengthened her credibility now. To them, her comments sounded less like calculated attacks and more like carefully controlled honesty from someone who had stayed silent for years. At the same time, Meghan's supporters fiercely rejected that growing narrative. They argued the internet was deliberately framing Sophie as a hero while unfairly turning Meghan into a villain. Some pointed out that short edited clips often removed important context and encouraged audiences to make harsh assumptions based on facial expressions and isolated remarks. Others believed the backlash reflected deeper divisions surrounding Meghan that had existed since her earliest days inside the royal family. To them, the online obsession with Sophie's words revealed more about public bias than about the actual truth behind palace tensions. But despite the pushback, the controversy refused to fade. Every new discussion seemed to create even more division. Television hosts debated Sophie's intentions. Podcasts questioned whether her remarks had been subtle warnings all along. Social media users treated every old royal appearance like hidden evidence waiting to be decoded. The conflict no longer centered only on Meghan and Sophie themselves. It evolved into something larger and far more unstable, a cultural argument about loyalty, victimhood, public image, and institutional power. As audiences continued choosing sides with increasing intensity, one reality became impossible to ignore. The royal fallout that once seemed finished was now more alive than ever, and the internet appeared determined to keep pulling the story deeper into chaos. And nobody seemed capable of stopping. With the internet now split into fierce camps, one question grows louder. Was this a genuine opinion or a calculated message? Could Sophie be shaping the narrative more than anyone realizes? And why are certain clips suddenly disappearing while others spread uncontrollably behind the scenes no one notices? Stay tuned. Titles: Suddenly Changed, Everything Forever. Just as the online controversy surrounding Meghan Markle continued spreading across television and social media, another development inside the royal family suddenly intensified the situation even further. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, was no longer being discussed only because of resurfaced interviews or viral comments. Her growing role inside the monarchy now placed her directly beside some of the institution's most senior figures during major public appearances, creating a powerful visual contrast that audiences immediately noticed. At the exact moment Meghan faced renewed criticism online, Sophie's royal profile appeared stronger than ever. The timing of those events became impossible for commentators to ignore. After receiving the title Duchess of Edinburgh alongside Prince Edward, Sophie began attracting significantly more public attention during official engagements connected to the monarchy. Media coverage increasingly described her as steady, dependable, and trusted by the royal institution. Photographs of Sophie standing beside King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales spread widely online as commentators highlighted her decades of quiet service to the crown. Many viewers began comparing Sophie's patient rise inside the royal family with Meghan's dramatic departure only a few years earlier. That comparison quickly became one of the most uncomfortable parts of the growing debate. Critics argued Sophie represented the kind of slow adaptation and discipline expected within royal life. They pointed to her years of learning royal protocol, carrying out engagements, and remaining loyal during difficult moments involving the monarchy. Meghan's supporters strongly pushed back against those claims, arguing the situations were completely different and unfairly simplified. They insisted Meghan faced pressures, media attention, and scrutiny, unlike anything Sophie experienced during her early years inside the institution. Yet, despite those arguments, the comparisons continued spreading online with increasing intensity. At the same time, Sophie's calm public image appeared to strengthen every time the controversy resurfaced. Unlike the emotional battles unfolding online, Sophie continued appearing composed during royal appearances without publicly responding to the debate surrounding Meghan. Royal insiders reportedly praised her professionalism and ability to remain focused on official duties while headlines exploded around her. For critics of Meghan, that silence only reinforced the idea that Sophie had handled royal pressure more successfully. For Meghan's supporters, however, the growing narrative felt deeply unfair and driven by selective public perception rather than the full reality behind palace walls. Still, the symbolism surrounding Sophie's rise became difficult to separate from the wider royal conflict. As she stepped further into prominent royal roles, audiences increasingly viewed her as the embodiment of continuity and institutional loyalty. And with every appearance beside senior royals, the online debate surrounding Meghan seemed to grow even louder, more divided, and far more dangerous than before. What made the moment striking was the growing belief that the monarchy no longer needed to defend Sophie. Her image appeared to strengthen as arguments intensified around Meghan, and as viewers kept revisiting controversies through this new lens, the balance of sympathy inside the story seemed to shift once again. With Sophie's growing influence inside the monarchy and public confidence shifting, what does this mean for Meghan's already fragile narrative? Is this coincidence or carefully shaped perception? And who stands to gain when comparisons begin to harden into reputation? Stay glued. Quiet sentence changed everything forever. By the time Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, made one final remark during a carefully controlled interview, the royal debate surrounding Meghan Markle had already consumed social media, television panels, podcasts, and newspaper headlines across multiple countries. Yet unlike the emotional interviews and public accusations that had dominated the controversy for years, Sophie delivered her words with remarkable restraint. There were no dramatic gestures, no visible frustration, and no direct attacks. That quiet approach became exactly why the moment landed with such force. When Sophie reflected on her own introduction into royal life and calmly noted that it had taken her 5 years to fully understand the institution, audiences immediately began interpreting the comment as something far more significant than simple personal reflection. The statement spread rapidly online because many viewers believed the comparison was impossible to ignore. Meghan Markle had stepped away from royal duties alongside Prince Harry after less than 2 years as a senior working royal, later describing painful experiences inside the monarchy during interviews, documentaries, and public appearances. Sophie, however, appeared to present an entirely different perspective without ever directly mentioning Meghan by name. Commentators quickly argued that the message hidden beneath Sophie's words was painfully clear. Adapting to royal life was never expected to happen quickly, easily, or without struggle. To critics of Meghan, Sophie's remarks sounded like a subtle reminder that patience and endurance were part of the process. What made the moment especially powerful was Sophie's delivery. She never sounded angry or defensive while discussing events that had deeply divided public opinion for years. Royal analysts repeatedly pointed out that Sophie had mastered a rare form of communication inside the monarchy. She could suggest disagreement, disappointment, or criticism without openly turning anything into public conflict. That restraint allowed her comments to carry unusual weight because viewers felt they were hearing honesty instead of performance. Supporters of Meghan strongly rejected those interpretations and insisted people were twisting innocent remarks into attacks that Sophie never intended. But the debate itself continued growing larger with every replayed clip and every new discussion online. As the controversy intensified, many people began asking a question that seemed increasingly unavoidable. Had Sophie quietly succeeded in shaping public perception without ever fighting publicly at all? While Meghan and Harry relied on interviews and media exposure to tell their story, Sophie relied almost entirely on silence, composure, and carefully chosen sentences delivered years apart. In the eyes of many viewers, that strategy now appeared surprisingly effective. The loudest voice no longer controlled the narrative. Instead, one calm sentence spoken without visible emotion suddenly carried more influence than years of headlines, arguments, and televised explanations. And in that growing silence surrounding Sophie's words, the royal conflict appeared far from finished. The deeper audiences examined those interviews, appearances, and forgotten moments, the harder it became to separate perception from reality. What once looked like tension now seemed connected by a pattern many viewers believed had been visible from the beginning. So, what do you think? Did Sophie quietly expose Meghan's contradictions without directly attacking her publicly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more royal controversies.